home is where the heart is. I used to believe that. I used to think that the four walls of this limestone mansion were a fortress, a sanctuary where the world's noise couldn't reach me. But I was wrong, dead wrong. A home can be a prison. It can be a stage where you're forced to play a role you never auditioned for. And sometimes it's just a crime scene waiting for the bodies to be discovered. Before I get into how I lost everything and how I'm about to take back 10 times more, I want to ask you guys something. Have you ever felt like a ghost in your own life? Like you're watching yourself from the corner of the ceiling, wondering how you ended up here? Let me know in the comments where you're watching this from. New York, London, maybe somewhere small like I used to be. I need to know there's a real world out there because for 5 years, mine has been a hallucination. And if you've ever been underestimated, stick around. Hit that subscribe button, because this isn't just a story about a guy getting cheated on. This is a manual on how to burn a dynasty to the ground and stay warm by the fire. It started with a smell. Not a bad smell, actually. It was expensive. Oud wood, Tom Ford. It's the kind of scent that screams, I have a hedge fund and I don't care about your feelings. The problem was, I don't wear Tom Ford. I wear whatever is on sale at Target because every cent I make at my father-in-law's firm goes back into the family fund. I was standing in our master bedroom. The sun was setting over the manicured hills of our gated community, casting long, bloody shadows across the silk sheets. Hailey was in the shower, humming some pop song. She sounded happy. Why wouldn't she be? She had the house, the cars, the jewelry, and a husband who stayed in the guest room more often than his own bed. I leaned over to pick up a stray pillow that had fallen to the floor. As I pressed it back onto the bed, that scent hit me. It was fresh. It was aggressive. And then I saw it. Tucked just under the edge of the dust ruffle was a small gold object. I reached down, my fingers trembling. It was a cufflink, heavy, 18-karat gold, engraved with the initials AB. My stomach did a slow, sickening roll. AB, Arthur Beaumont. My boss. Hailey's mentor. The man who had given me a charity job because I married into his social circle. I didn't scream. I didn't even drop the cufflink. I just stood there, staring at my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling vanity mirror. I looked pathetic. A charity case in a tailored suit he didn't own. You see, I'm the classic stay-at-home son-in-law. When I married Hailey, her father Clarence made it very clear I was a guest. I moved into their family estate. I took a position at their company, Beaumont and Associates, but I was never one of them. I was the guy who fetched the dry cleaning and signed the papers Clarence didn't want to touch. I was the placeholder. Liam, are you still in there? Hailey's voice drifted from the bathroom. The shower stopped. I shoved the cufflink into my pocket. My hand was sweating. Yeah, I'm just getting ready for dinner, I called back. My voice sounded thin, like a wire about to snap. Make sure you use the good gin for the cocktails, she shouted. Trent is coming over from next door. He said he wanted to talk to you about the property line or something. Trent? Our neighbor. The guy who spends 4 hours a day in his garage working on a vintage Porsche he never drives. The guy who always seems to be shirtless when Hailey is gardening. I walked downstairs, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The house was quiet, but it felt crowded. Every corner held a memory of a condescending look from her mother, Genevieve, or a remark from Clarence about my lack of ambition. I went to the bar in the library. I started fixing the drinks. I could hear the front door open. It was Clarence and Genevieve. They lived in the East Wing, but they treated the whole house like their personal playground. Oh, Liam, you're actually doing something useful for once, Genevieve remarked as she swept into the room, draped in pearls that cost more than my college tuition. She didn't look at me. She looked at the gin bottle. A bit more lime in mine today. It's been a taxing afternoon at the gallery. Clarence followed her, his face a mask of permanent disappointment. He poured himself a scotch without acknowledging I was there. The Beaumont deal is sliding, Liam. I hope you finish those projections. I don't pay you to sit around and play house. They're on your desk, Clarence, I said, my voice steady. It was a lie. The projections were finished, but they weren't on his desk. They were in a private cloud drive he didn't even know existed. I was starting to realize something. They didn't just hate me. They didn't see me at all. I was the furniture. And you don't hide your secrets from the furniture. Trent arrived a few minutes later. He walked in without knocking, his chest puffed out, wearing a polo shirt 2 sizes too small. He slapped me on the shoulder, a friendly gesture that felt more like a test of strength. "Hey, buddy, good to see you. Hailey around?" "She's upstairs," I said, handing him a drink. He took a long sip, his eyes roaming the room until they landed on the stairs. When Hailey came down, she wasn't wearing the sundress she'd mentioned. She was wearing a black silk slip dress. It was provocative. It was a statement. She didn't walk to me. She walked straight to Trent. "Trent, you made it. Did you bring those blueprints you were talking about?" "Right here," he grinned, tapping his phone. The dinner was a masterclass in humiliation. I sat at the head of the table, a position Clarence allowed me only because it amused him, while my wife flirted openly with the neighbor. Genevieve and Clarence watched, their expressions neutral, almost bored. It was as if this was the natural order of things. The help sits at the table while the royals play. "Liam, you're awfully quiet tonight," Hailey said, her eyes glinting with a cruel sort of playfulness. She reached out and patted my hand, but she didn't look at me. She was looking at Trent. "Is the work at the firm too much for you? Maybe you need a vacation, alone." Trent chuckled. "Maybe he just needs to get out in the sun more. You're looking a bit pale, Liam." I looked down at my plate. The steak was perfectly cooked, but it tasted like ash. I felt the gold cufflink in my pocket, pressing against my thigh. I thought about the 5 years I had given this family. I had saved their company from 3 different lawsuits they were too arrogant to see coming. I had managed their private accounts, the ones they used to funnel money away from the IRS. I had been the perfect, loyal, silent partner. And this was my reward. To be cuckolded in my own home by the neighbor, while the boss's cufflink sat in my pocket and the in-laws cheered from the sidelines. "I think I'll take that drink to the patio," I said, standing up abruptly. The chair scraped harshly against the marble floor. "Don't be a bore, Liam," Genevieve sighed. "We haven't even finished the wine." I didn't answer. I walked out onto the patio. The night air was cool, smelling of jasmine and expensive fertilizer. I walked to the edge of the infinity pool and looked out at the city lights. I took out my phone. I pulled up the security app. I hadn't installed these cameras for protection against burglars. I had installed them because I had stopped trusting my own shadow months ago. I tapped the feed for the master bedroom. I scrolled back to 2 o'clock this afternoon, when I was supposedly at the office filing Clarence's taxes. There she was. Hailey. And there he was. Arthur Beaumont. My boss. The mentor. They weren't even hiding it. They were laughing. At me. I could see Hailey pointing at my side of the bed, saying something that made Beaumont double over with laughter. Then, the camera caught something else. The door opened. It wasn't me. It was Genevieve. She walked in carrying a tray of mimosas. She didn't look shocked. She didn't look angry. She laughed with them. She fluffed the pillows. She was the hostess for her daughter's infidelity. My hand shook so hard I almost dropped the phone into the pool. The betrayal wasn't just a physical act. It was an ecosystem. The whole family was in on it. I was the sacrificial lamb they kept around because I was the only one who actually knew how to run the business. I was the engine in a car they were driving into the ground, and they were laughing at the smoke. I closed the app. I looked at the cufflink in my palm. It wasn't just gold anymore, it was a key. I went back inside. The laughter from the dining room was louder now. Trent was telling a story about his Porsche. Hailey was leaning in so close her hair was brushing his arm. I walked past them, my face a perfect empty mask. "Going to bed already, Liam?" Clarence called out, his voice thick with scotch and contempt. "Some of us have a company to run in the morning." "I'm just going to finish some paperwork, Clarence," I said. "I want to make sure everything is in order. For the future." "Good lad," he muttered, already turning back to his drink. I climbed the stairs, but I didn't go to the guest room. I went into the library, the one place they never went because it didn't have a TV or a bar. I locked the door. I sat down at the heavy oak desk and opened my laptop. My fingers moved across the keys with a speed born of pure, cold adrenaline. For 5 years, I had been the quiet one, the useful one. I had access to every server, every encrypted file, every offshore routing number. They thought I was a doormat. They thought I was too weak to leave because I had nowhere to go. They were right. I had nowhere to go, so I decided I wasn't going anywhere. I was going to stay. I was going to watch. I was going to serve them their drinks and file their taxes and smile at their jokes. I was going to be the perfect broken husband for as long as it took. I started a new file. I labeled it Project Exorcism. Inside, I began to map out the spiderweb of their finances. I saw the leaks. I saw the greed. I saw exactly how Clarence had been borrowing from the employee pension fund to pay for Genevieve's art collection. I saw the illegal kickbacks Beaumont was taking from the city developers. It was a mountain of dirt, and I was going to be the one to bury them under it. But I couldn't just call the police. That was too easy. They had lawyers. They had influence. No, if I wanted them gone, I had to own them first. I had to become the very thing they thought I was, a ghost, and haunt them until they had nothing left but the clothes on their backs. I spent the next 4 hours creating a ghost entity, a company with no name based in the Cayman Islands, designed for one purpose: to slowly, invisibly, buy up the debt of Beaumont and Associates. Every time Clarence took a loan to cover his gambling debts, I would be the one providing the cash through a third-party lender. Every time Hailey maxed out a secret credit card, I would be the one buying the debt from the bank. I would own their house, I would own their cars, I would own their very names, and they would never see it coming because they didn't think I was capable of a single original thought. Around 2 a.m., I heard the guest room door open downstairs. Then the front door. Trent was leaving. A few minutes later, I heard Hailey's footsteps on the stairs. They were light, rhythmic, the sound of someone who didn't have a care in the world. She paused outside the library door. I froze, my heart stopping in my chest. "Liam?" she whispered. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. "I know you're in there, you weirdo," she giggled, her voice slurred from the wine. "Don't work too hard. We need you sharp for the board meeting tomorrow. Arthur is expecting big things from you." She laughed again, a soft, mocking sound that echoed in the hallway, and then I heard her bedroom door click shut. I looked back at the screen. The progress bar for the first transfer was at 99%. Click. Transaction complete. The first brick had been removed from the foundation. It was small, unnoticeable. But the weight of the house had shifted just a fraction of an inch. I stood up and walked to the window. The moon was high now, silvering the hills. I felt a strange sense of peace. The pain was still there, a jagged, raw hole in the center of my chest, but it was being paved over by something harder, something colder. I wasn't the guy who got cheated on anymore. I was a hunter, and I was patient. I walked out of the library and down the hall. I stopped in front of our bedroom door. I could hear the faint sound of the television inside. Hailey was probably watching some reality show, oblivious to the fact that her reality had just fundamentally changed. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the gold cufflink. I looked at it one last time in the dim hallway light. Then, I knelt down and slid it back under the door, letting it come to rest exactly where I had found it. I turned away and walked toward the guest room, my footsteps silent on the thick carpet, my mind already calculating the interest rates on their destruction. I sat on the edge of the narrow guest bed, staring at the closed door, and slowly began to unbutton my shirt, one steady hand at a time. The fabric of my shirt felt like sandpaper against my skin as I pulled it off, every nerve ending in my body vibrating with a frequency I didn't know I possessed. The guest room was cold, stripped of the warmth and curated luxury that Hailey draped over the rest of the house. It was a sterile box, much like the life I had been forced to inhabit. I didn't sleep that night. I watched the shadows of the oak trees outside dance against the wall, tracing the outlines of a future where I wasn't the punchline of a rich family's joke. My mind was no longer a whirlpool of despair. It had become a ledger. By 6 a.m., the sun began to bleed through the curtains, a pale, sickly yellow. I was already downstairs, the smell of coffee acting as my only anchor to the physical world. I heard the floorboards groan above, Clarence's heavy, entitled stride. This was the ritual. I would make the coffee, I would toast the artisanal bread, and I would wait for the insults to begin. "You're up early," Clarence grunted, entering the kitchen in a silk robe that cost more than my first car. He didn't look at me. He never did. To him, I was just a sophisticated appliance that happened to speak. "I need the quarterly reports for the Midwest sector by noon. Beaumont is breathing down my neck, and I won't have your incompetence making me look bad." "They'll be ready, Clarence," I said, my voice as flat and polished as the granite countertop. "They better be. And try to dress like you actually belong in a boardroom today, Liam. That suit you wore yesterday made you look like a substitute teacher." I watched his back as he shuffled toward the sunroom. 5 years ago, those words would have stung. They would have made me retreat, made me work twice as hard just to earn a nod of approval that never came. Now, they were just data points. Each insult was a line of code in the program I was writing for his downfall. The signs of the rot were everywhere if you knew where to look. Over the next few weeks, I became a professional voyeur of my own misery. I started noticing the small things. The way Hailey, would tilt her head when she was texting Logan, her best friend. He was a frequent guest, a guy who claimed to be my brother, while he was practically salivating over my wife in front of me. "Man, you're so lucky to have her, Liam," Logan said one afternoon as we sat on the deck. He was nursing a craft beer, his feet up on my table. "A woman like Hailey. She's high maintenance, but she's worth it, right?" He gave me a wink, a disgusting, knowing twitch of the eye that told me everything. He wasn't just talking about her personality. He was marking his territory. He thought he was being subtle. He thought I was too slow, too blinded by my low-born gratitude to see the truth. I just smiled. "She's definitely one of a kind, Logan. I don't know what I'd do without people like you looking out for her when I'm busy." The irony was so thick I could nearly choke on it, but he just laughed, a loud, empty sound that echoed off the limestone walls. I realized then that my greatest weapon wasn't the money I was moving or the files I was stealing. It was their collective belief that I was an idiot. The emotional toll, however, was a different beast. There were nights when the silence of the guest room felt like a physical weight on my chest. I would hear muffled laughter from the master suite, or the distinct sound of the side door clicking shut at 3 a.m. after Trent or Logan or whoever else was in the rotation decided to head home. I had to learn to compartmentalize the pain, to take the raw, jagged edges of my heart and forge them into a blade. I remember one specific Tuesday. I had come home early to grab some files I'd forgotten. The house was eerily quiet. As I walked past the laundry room, I saw Genevieve, my mother-in-law, holding a shirt. It wasn't mine. It was a bright, obnoxious floral print. One I had seen Logan wearing earlier that week. She was humming, carefully ironing out the wrinkles. When she saw me, she didn't jump. She didn't look guilty. She just smiled that icy, aristocratic smile of hers. "Oh, Liam, back so soon?" "Logan left this here after the tennis match. I thought I'd help out. Hailey is so busy these days, you know." "Of course, Genevieve," I said, my pulse drumming in my ears. "Always looking out for the family." "Family is everything," she replied, her voice dripping with a condescension that felt like acid. "It's a shame you'll never truly understand what that means. You weren't born into it after all." I walked away, my knuckles white as I gripped my briefcase. That was the moment I stopped feeling any shred of guilt for what I was about to do. They weren't just betraying a marriage. They were maintaining a cult of superiority where I was the permanent outsider, a tool to be used until the gears stripped. At the firm, the pressure was mounting. Mr. Beaumont, Arthur, was becoming increasingly bold. He started calling me into his office not to talk business, but to brag about conquests in coded language. "You know, Liam, it's all about the hunt," he said, leaning back in his leather chair, the gold cufflink I'd returned to Hailey's floor likely back in his drawer. "Finding something that belongs to someone else and realizing you can take it because you're simply better. That's the American dream, isn't it?" "I suppose it is, Mr. Beaumont," I replied, staring at the fountain pen on his desk. It was an antique, worth more than a year of my salary. I had already authorized a digital maintenance fee from his personal holding account that would cover the cost of 50 of those pens. By the third year of my 5-year plan, the ghost company I'd created was no longer a shadow. It was a titan. I had successfully diverted nearly 40% of Beaumont and Associates' liquid assets into offshore accounts under the guise of aggressive reinvestment strategies that Clarence was too lazy to audit. I had become the architect of their phantom prosperity. On paper, they were wealthier than ever. In reality, they were living in a house of cards, and I held the fan. The loneliness was the hardest part. I had to alienate everyone. I couldn't have friends. I couldn't have confidants. If I was seen with anyone, it might trigger a suspicion in the family. I became a hermit in a house full of people. I spent my weekends at the office or in the library, staring at spreadsheets that represented the slow, methodical erosion of a dynasty. One night, Hailey actually came into the guest room. She looked soft, that practiced manipulative softness she used when she wanted something. She sat on the edge of my bed, the scent of wine and someone else's cologne clinging to her. "Liam, don't you get tired of this?" she asked, tracing a pattern on the duvet. "Being so serious all the time? You're like a robot lately." "I'm just focused on the merger, Hailey. For you." "For your father," I said, the lies sliding off my tongue like silk. "You're a good provider, Liam. I'll give you that." She leaned in and kissed my cheek. It felt like the touch of a reptile. "Just don't forget who gave you all of this. Without us, you're just a kid from the trailer park with a degree." She left, and I sat there in the dark for hours. I didn't feel the sting of her words. I felt the weight of the flash drive in my pocket. It contained the final pieces of the puzzle. The evidence of Clarence's creative accounting regarding the employee pension fund. It was the nuclear option. As the 5th year approached, I felt a shift in the atmosphere. The family was getting sloppy. Their arrogance had reached a fever pitch. They weren't even trying to hide the affairs anymore. Dinner parties were filled with inside jokes, at my expense, told while I was sitting right there. They talked about me as if I were a deaf butler. The final straw came when I discovered they were planning to dump me. I was in the crawl space of the office, fixing a network issue that I had actually created, when I heard Clarence and Beaumont talking in the hallway. "We don't need him anymore, Arthur." Clarence's voice was gravelly. "The merger is set. We can tie up his termination with a solid NDA and a small settlement. Hailey is bored with him anyway. She wants to make things official with Logan. He's served his purpose," Beaumont chuckled. "He kept the books clean while we had our fun. Let's cut the cord after the anniversary party next month. It'll be a nice little gift for Hailey." I stayed in that crawl space long after they left. The dust filled my lungs, but I didn't cough. I didn't move. I just watched a spider in the corner of the ceiling, meticulously weaving a web. It didn't matter how big the fly was. Once the web was finished, the fly was just a meal. I went back to the house that evening. The lights were blazing, and I could hear music blaring from the pool area. It was another impromptu party. I saw Hailey laughing as Trent lifted her into the air. I saw Genevieve hand-feeding Logan grapes. I saw Clarence holding court with a group of investors, selling them a future that no longer belonged to him. I walked past them all, invisible as always. I went to the basement, to the heavy iron safe where Clarence kept his emergency documents. He thought I didn't have the code. He thought I didn't know about the secondary hidden compartment behind the false back. I opened the safe. The cold air hit my face as I reached in and pulled out the original deed to the estate. My hands were steady as I placed it on the scanner I'd brought down. The light of the scanner crawled across the paper, a slow blue line that felt like a countdown. I watched the image appear on my tablet. Every signature, every seal, every piece of evidence that this house was about to change hands. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of something that wasn't quite joy and wasn't quite sorrow. It was the feeling of a man who had finally reached the end of a long, dark tunnel and realized he had forgotten how to breathe in the light. I tucked the original back into its place and closed the safe with a soft, metallic thud. The vibration traveled up my arm, a physical punctuation mark, to 5 years of silence. I stood in the shadows of the basement, listening to the muffled bass of the music above, and slowly pulled a small, black notebook from my inner pocket to cross off the final name on my list. The ink in my notebook seemed to shimmer under the dim basement bulb, the dark lines representing lives I was about to dismantle. As I climbed the stairs back to the main floor, The heavy thumping of the bass from the pool area vibrated through the soles of my shoes, but it felt distant, like a storm happening on another continent. I wasn't just a guest in this house anymore. I was the ghost in the machine, the silent architect of an impending collapse. Every brick in this mansion, every bottle of vintage wine in the cellar, was now tethered to my thumb by a digital thread, waiting for the pull. The following morning, the atmosphere at Beaumont and Associates was electric. It was the week leading up to the 5th anniversary gala, a celebration Hailey and her father had rebranded as a victory ball for the upcoming merger. To them, it was a coronation. To me, it was a funeral rehearsal. "Liam, get in here," Arthur Beaumont barked from his office door. He didn't use the intercom. He enjoyed the power trip of shouting across the hall. I entered, my expression carefully neutral. Arthur was standing by the window adjusting his silk tie. He looked smug, the kind of radiance that only comes from thinking you've successfully stolen someone's dignity and their future. "The final merger documents are on your screen," Arthur said without turning around. "I want them signed, notarized, and filed by 5 o'clock. This is the big one, kid. After this, we're untouchable." I sat at my desk and pulled up the files. My heart didn't even skip a beat. I had written these documents myself. Clarence and Arthur were so blinded by their own greed that they hadn't even read the fine print in Section 12, subsection C. They thought they were merging with a tech conglomerate from Silicon Valley. In reality, they were transferring the entirety of their remaining corporate voting rights to a holding company that, as of midnight, was 100% owned by me. "Everything looks perfect, Arthur," I said, hitting the send key with a satisfying click. "You're right. After today, everything changes." He laughed, a dry, grating sound. "You've been a good soldier, Liam, dull as a rock but reliable. Don't worry, there's a nice bonus in it for you once the dust settles. Maybe you can finally buy a personality." I watched him walk out, his expensive shoes clicking on the hardwood. I didn't feel anger. I felt a strange, cold clarity. It was like watching a man walk off a cliff while he was busy admiring his own reflection in a hand mirror. The nights grew longer as the gala approached. I had to play my part with surgical precision. At home, the disrespect reached a fever pitch. One evening, I walked into the kitchen to find Logan, the best friend, leaning against the counter, brazenly wearing one of my favorite sweaters. He was laughing with Hailey while she sipped a martini. "Oh, hey, Liam," Logan said, not even bothered to straighten up. "I hope you don't mind. It got a bit chilly on the patio and Hailey said you wouldn't care. You're a generous guy, after all." Hailey didn't even look up from her drink. "It looks better on him anyway, Liam. You always were a bit too stiff for that style." I walked to the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and smiled. "Keep it, Logan, truly. I'm moving on to much better things soon. I won't be needing it." They shared a look, a mocking, "there he goes again" glance, and went back to their conversation as if I had vanished into the air. They were so convinced of my weakness that they had become functionally blind. They didn't see the way I was watching the clock. They didn't notice that the routine maintenance I was doing on the house's smart system was actually me locking down the digital gates. The night before the gala, the house was a whirlwind of caterers and decorators. Genevieve was in her element, barking orders at the staff like a general. Clarence was in the library, likely drinking away the last of his company's liquid assets, oblivious to the fact that his emergency fund had been drained to 6 hours ago. I found Hailey in the master bedroom, surrounded by 3 different designer dresses. She looked at me through the vanity mirror, her eyes cold. "You're going to wear the navy suit tomorrow, Liam," she stated, not asking. "And please, try to stay in the background. This night is about my family's legacy, not your hard work. I don't want you embarrassing me in front of the board." "I'll be exactly where I need to be, Hailey," I replied. I walked over and picked up a discarded silk scarf from the bed, the one she had worn the day I saw her with Arthur on the security feed. I handed it to her. "You should wear this. It suits you. It's very transparent." She snatched it from my hand, frowning. "You're being weirder than usual. Just stay out of the way, okay?" I left the room without a word. I went down to the basement one last time. I sat in the dark, surrounded by the humming of the servers I had installed. I opened my laptop and ran a final diagnostic. All accounts diverted, all deeds transferred. all evidence, encrypted and ready for distribution. The merger wasn't just a corporate move anymore. I had structured it as a total acquisition of their personal debt. Every cent Clarence had borrowed to maintain this facade was now a high-interest loan owed directly to me. Every mortgage payment they thought was being handled by their trust was now a default notice waiting to be served. I looked at the security feed. I saw Logan sneaking into the guest wing. I saw Trent pull his Porsche into our driveway for an after-hours drink. I saw Clarence stumbling toward his bedroom, clutching a bottle of scotch like a life preserver. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of the 5 years I had lost. The birthdays spent alone at the office. The anniversaries where I was treated like an unwanted servant. The hundreds of nights I had spent in the guest room, listening to the echoes of my own betrayal. I reached out and touched the screen, tracing the outline of the house. It was a beautiful prison. And tomorrow, I was going to open all the doors and let the wolves in. As the sun began to rise on the morning of the gala, I didn't feel the usual dread. I felt light. I felt like a man who had been holding his breath underwater for half a decade and was finally, slowly, rising toward the surface. I went to the kitchen and made a single cup of coffee, the steam rising in the quiet morning light. I stood by the window, watching the caterers set up the white tents on the lawn, the tents that would soon house the greatest public humiliation in the history of this town. I went to the guest room and laid out my suit, not the navy one Hailey had ordered. I chose a charcoal gray suit I had bought with my own secret funds. A suit that fit me perfectly, the kind of suit a man wears when he's about to take his seat at the head of the table. As I dressed, I heard the house begin to wake up. The shouting, the frantic preparations, the arrogance. I tied my tie with a steady hand, my reflection in the small guest room mirror looking back at me with eyes that no longer held any trace of the boy who had walked into this house 5 years ago. I walked out of the room, leaving the door wide open. I didn't need to hide anymore. I walked down the grand staircase, my footsteps echoing with a new, heavy authority. I reached the bottom and stood in the center of the foyer, looking up at the chandelier that I now technically owned. I pulled my phone from my pocket, my thumb hovering over the execute button for the first phase of the evening's festivities, and felt the cold, sharp rush of the final countdown beginning in my veins. The glass of the smartphone felt icy against my skin, a stark contrast to the boiling anticipation surging through my chest. I didn't press the button yet. I wanted to savor the silence one last time, the quiet before the avalanche. Looking around the foyer, I realized I was no longer a resident. I was a landlord watching a group of squatters throw a party in a house they no longer owned. Wait, before we get to the moment the walls actually start coming down, I have to ask, have you ever had to sit through a dinner or a meeting where you knew a secret so big it felt like your chest might explode? That feeling of being the only sober person in a room full of people drunk on their own lies? Drop a in the comments if you've ever had your own quiet win moment. And if you're still here, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because the next 10 minutes are why I waited 5 long years. The gala was in full swing by 8 p.m. The backyard was a sea of tuxedos and evening gowns, illuminated by thousands of fairy lights that looked like fallen stars. I stood on the periphery, watching Arthur Beaumont clink glasses with Clarence. They looked like kings. Hailey was nearby, glowing in a dress that probably cost more than a mid-sized sedan, her hand resting casually on Logan's arm, while they laughed at something a board member said. "Liam, there you are," Hailey said, her voice dripping with irritation as she spotted me. She pulled me aside, her grip on my arm tight and dismissive. "Why aren't you wearing the navy suit? You look like you're attending a funeral in that charcoal gray." I looked her directly in the eyes, something I hadn't done in years. "In a way, Hailey, I am," she scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Whatever, just don't ruin this. Arthur is about to announce the merger. Try to look grateful for the life we gave you." She walked away, returning to Logan's side. I watched them for a moment, then I pulled out my phone. I didn't look at the screen as my thumb finally made contact with the execute button. Phase 1. The digital blackout. Suddenly, the upbeat jazz music faltered and died. The fairy lights flickered once, twice, and then extinguished, plunging the garden into a disorienting twilight. A murmur of confusion rippled through the crowd. "Liam, what happened to the power?" Clarence shouted from across the lawn, his face reddening. "Fix it! Now!" "It's not the power, Clarence," I said, my voice carrying through the sudden silence. I wasn't shouting, but for the first time, everyone was listening. The giant projection screen intended for the merger presentation hummed to life, but it didn't show the Beaumont and Associates logo. Instead, it displayed a simple high-definition spreadsheet. It was a list of every offshore account, every diverted pension fund, and every private loan Clarence had taken out over the last 60 months. The crowd went silent. Arthur Beaumont's glass shattered on the stone patio. "What is this?" Clarence roared, stepping toward the screen. "This is a glitch. Liam, shut it down." "I can't do that," I replied, stepping into the light of the projector, "because that data is currently being uploaded to the SEC and the IRS servers, along with the security footage from the master bedroom." The screen shifted. It didn't show the affairs. I wasn't that petty. Instead, it showed the legal documents I had signed that morning. It showed the title deed to the estate, the ownership papers for the firm, and a very clear, very final eviction notice addressed to the entire family. Hailey's face went from pale to a ghostly white. Logan tried to step away from her, but the crowd was circling, their phones out, recording every second of the implosion. You can't do this," Hailey stammered, her voice trembling. "This is my house. This is my father's company." "Not anymore," I said, walking toward her. I reached into my pocket and pulled out Arthur Beaumont's gold cufflink. I dropped it into her champagne glass. It sank with a heavy metallic clink. "The merger you signed today wasn't with a tech firm. It was with me. I own the debt, Hailey. I own the house. And as of 5 minutes ago, I've officially terminated every single one of you for gross misconduct and financial fraud." Clarence lunged at me, but 2 men in suits, actual security I had hired, not the family's payroll guards, stepped in front of him. "Get out," I said, the words cold and sharp. "The moving trucks are at the gate. You have 20 minutes to gather what you can carry. The rest belongs to the creditors." Which, in case you haven't realized, is me. Genevieve began to scream, a high-pitched, hysterical sound that cut through the night air. Margot and Lawrence, the in-laws who had treated me like a stray dog, stood frozen, their social standing evaporating in real time. I watched as Hailey realized Logan was already heading for his car, not looking back. I watched as Arthur Beaumont tried to flee, only to be met at the edge of the property by federal agents I had coordinated with weeks ago. The victory ball had turned into a mass evacuation. I stood on the balcony of the mansion, watching the chaos unfold below. I saw the family being ushered toward the gate, clutching designer bags filled with whatever they could grab in a panic. Clarence was arguing with a police officer, his face a mask of broken pride. Hailey looked up at me one last time, her eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and a newfound terrifying realization of who I actually was. I didn't wave, I didn't smile, I just watched. The silence that followed was heavy. The guests had fled, the sirens had faded into the distance, and the fairy lights remained dark. I walked back into the foyer of the empty house. It didn't feel like a prison anymore. It just felt like a building. I sat down on the bottom step of the grand staircase, the same place I had sat 5 years ago when I first moved in, feeling like I had won the lottery. I pulled out my black notebook. I turned to the final page and drew a single, thick line through the last remaining name. So, here's the question I want to leave you with. If you were in my shoes, would you have waited 5 years to take everything? Or is the cost of your soul worth more than any house or company? Let me know in the comments. I'm reading every single one. And if you've ever been the one they overlooked, just remember, the quietest person in the room is usually the one with the most power. I stood up, the charcoal suit still perfectly pressed, and walked toward the kitchen to pour myself a glass of water, leaving the front door standing wide open to let the morning air finally clear out the scent of Tom Ford.